All right. Hey, thank you everyone for joining us today. Welcome to this webinar hosted by Hoxhunt, a human cybersecurity company. My name is Karri Kurumäki. I'm one of the co-founders of Hoxhunt. For those who don't know, Hoxhunt is a cybersecurity company focused on changing human behavior when it comes to social engineering, mainly phishing. Today, we're going to talk about the human element in cybersecurity. And to help us untangle the topic, we have Kevin DeLange, the Chief Information Security Officer of International Gaming Technologies, joining us. Kevin, so good to have you here today with us.
Well, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. Hey, Kevin, before we start today's topic, I just want to inform you and the audience that about the agenda of the day. So we're going to start off with some background introductions, then dive into the world of human element in cybersecurity, and then finish off with why, Kevin, you chose to choose Hoxhunt to IGT's awareness provider. Then at the end of the webinar, we have a Q&A session. So please remember, everyone at the audience, all of our guests, please remember to post your questions to the Q&A chat window. So you can click on the Q&A, you can post your questions anonymously or then by your own name, and we'll then handpick at the end of the webinar a few of those questions to ask from Kevin. But that's it for the agenda for today. So let's get right into it. Kevin, 17 years at IGT. Could you walk us through what International Gaming Technologies does as a company? What's the product, and then your role at IGT as well?
Sure. So IGT, International Game Technologies, we're the global leader in gaming. So we deliver responsible gaming experiences for players across many different channels and regulated segments, which include gaming machines, or EGMs as we call them, slot machines or video lottery terminals for most people. We do lotteries, which include online lotteries and scratch ticket games. And we also do digital offerings such as sports betting, poker, bingo, online casinos. So we have a well-established local presence and relationships with a lot of governments and regulators in more than actually 100 countries on 6 continents. As far as my role, I'm the Global Chief Information Security Officer for IGT. So I hold responsibility for most aspects of information security, specifically like governance, risk, compliance, security architecture, application security, operational, privacy, cyber operations, threat intelligence, business continuity, et cetera, et cetera. So quite a large footprint. And I've been in this role, as you said, for quite a while. So I think that probably far exceeds the typical burnout rate for CISOs by an order of magnitude for that amount of time, but it is what it is. Has its good points and its bad points.
Yeah, absolutely. By the way, you have a very wide role at IGT. How close are you to the board of IGT? How much do you communicate to that side? Since you're obviously leading the operations and all the operational teams, but then on the other side, you belong to the company. So how close are you to board?
So I have to report to either the audit committee or the board. It's either once a year or at least once a year or twice a year if I have to report to the audit committee. But I have, large exposure, obviously, to executive management in the company. So various governance committees that I interact with, which then directly interact with the board. So either indirectly or directly, I have a lot of visibility with the board. Okay. I should say information security, the role itself has a lot of visibility. Hopefully I don't have as much.
Yeah, okay, good. So hey, Corona hit us around a year ago. I remember I was supposed to meet you guys in Rhode Island in your headquarters, yeah. But I was on a flight back to Finland to our headquarters. How did Corona affect IGT on the business side, but then on the cybersecurity side as well? How was 2020 like?
Yeah, I think we're not unlike most companies in most respects, and I think reaction to the pandemic was the same as most companies, right? We immediately had impact because we have a large China operation in China, so we sort of got in front of it. Um, this remote workforce model by learning what we had to do quickly in China, and then that sort of set the footprint from a company perspective on how we would operate around the rest of the world. So it was kind of seamless. It went actually very well. It was kind of shocking how quickly we adjusted. But then that led to changes in the way, over the last year, it's really had a significant change in the way that we operate from a security perspective. Because when you externalize applications in the workforce and they're using different methods to get in. You're not in the traditional moat and castle kind of traditional perimeter approach anymore. You have people on the outside of that perimeter accessing applications and such. So it's a different model, and you really have to approach it from a security perspective in a different way.
Yeah, absolutely. What made you, or what type of changes did you have to do due to COVID-19? People escaping the kingdom and being in their own home. Um, how have you reacted to that?
Uh, it, it is what it is, right? So from a basic level, you just deal with the same way security deals with most things, right? Something pops up and you deal with it as it comes up. But I think the IT organization really had a larger role to play in this, and that they had to enable the business to operate remotely. So that, it's a paradigm shift in where your data resides, not necessarily in how people operate. Like I said, we're on 6 continents, so we were sort of set up to operate this at a basic level, but it's kind of nothing new from a security perspective. It's the same threats, it's the same sort of telemetry and stuff that you have to deal with. It just may be coming from a different area.
Yeah, absolutely. And now that on the topic of the same threats, what do you think are the biggest threats to IGT or to any organization for that matter?
Yeah, I think if you look at the stats, phishing by far is the largest attack vector. I don't think that's any different from IGT from any other company. Um, I mean, we have some added elements for us because I look at this from like a lottery perspective. And when you have lottery jackpots that can exceed the GDP of some countries, it would be naive to think that attackers wouldn't view that as something worth investing time and effort to go after. Um, but from a pure phishing perspective, I think as attackers move into the realm of machine learning and artificial intelligence, just like we are on the defensive side, they're going to want to increase their bottom line profits by automating, right? They're no different than any other kind of business in that respect. So for me, the language context and other parts of an email message and the associated risk with that is getting more precise, and it's getting more difficult to distinguish. So you really need tools at the perimeter as a necessary first line of defense. But equally important to me is you need an effective phishing awareness program, right? Because you can't, you can't ignore the human factor in this, and that's, you know, really what you have to put employees in the proper mindset to react to these things.
Yeah, absolutely. We at Hoxhunt have absolutely seen the kind of increase in opportunistic threat actors in the space. So people are actually investing more and more to opportunistic
Mm.
phishing. They just send out those tags and hope that someone kind of who gets hooked in, and then they start operating based on the information they get. You mentioned phishing, and you mentioned the technical layer and the human layer on kind of how critical that is to make those work well to protect your infrastructure. But now that we're on that topic, what do you think are the most critical in kind of things to input to your organization to protect yourself against these type of attacks, phishing attacks? How have you built your awareness program or the technical layer for that matter?
Mm. Well, obviously it's an iterative process. I mean, I don't think you can just drop in an awareness program or any kind of program expected to align with the business immediately, because there are a lot of components that make up a successful awareness program. I always try to start with the basic premise that the greatest majority of people want to do the right thing. And I think that's number one. And in fact, that's the primary psychological human tendency that attackers prey on, right? They know people want to do the right thing. So, they prey on people's instincts to, either click on something or respond to something that they think is coming from the right people. But secondly, I think and equally important is that not everybody learns the same way. Some people are visual learners, some people are textual learners. So you can't have a comprehensive solution in my mind without factoring in different approaches to this. So that's really what I've tried to do. If you incorporate all of those elements to prepare and arm employees with the right mindset for awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. On awareness, do you think there's a difference between awareness and behavior?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's the same thing, right? You have to make people aware, and you have to make people sort of tune into, right? If you don't stress people with real world scenarios, then they're going to become numb to it and immune to it. So awareness is really the technical part of getting in front of people's faces to make them aware of it. But getting them to react properly is the human element of that, right? And you can't do that without constantly stressing them with it.
Yeah, absolutely. Then kind of a pinpoint question on just the kind of on the topic of business email compromises. Where do you typically, or how do you find out about business email compromise? Is it the human layer? Is it the technical layer that alerts you, and kind of you have processes around that? But where do you get the information typically from first?
So you had, like I said, the volume of these attack vectors coming in is overwhelming, and you can't do that by yourself or manually. It's just too much, and you would need an army of people to sift through that data, and they still wouldn't do it in a timely fashion. So you need automated mechanisms for alerting people. So if you have a SOC or a cyber threat team, as we do, that get alerted to these things in almost real time, then the tools have the ability to react to those, but also people have the ability to react to it. I mean, BEC is a little bit different in that, people are actually taking action that can have harm to the company, but it's, again, if you have the tools in place to monitor behavior of the employees and to see aberrations from what an established baseline would be, then you're probably going to be in a lot better shape.
Yeah, absolutely. So then one classic question before we kind of move into ITT and Hoxhunt and then to Q&A. Actually, before we move into that, I want to remind our audience that remember to use the Q&A button and post your questions throughout the webinar now, so that we have something to ask from Kevin at the end of the webinar. Back to the topic, the classic question we ask everyone actually. An employee makes an error and that results in a breach. Who's to blame? Is it the organization? Is it the employee?
Well, my gut feeling is it's not me. But, yeah, I mean, responsibility, I mean, that's a catch-22, right? You can look at that from a lot of different angles. The employee clicks on a malicious link and launches something. If they're following company processes and procedures within their department, then and they do something that's contrary to what they've been instructed to do, I suppose ultimately it falls on them because they have personal responsibility in this equation. But the other side of the coin is if they haven't been equipped with the proper training, or you haven't deployed the proper technology in the company, or you're not staffed properly to manage the business in a secure fashion, then really that falls on management. But if all of that's done and there's still a breach, then I guess a root cause analysis of the actual event will ultimately determine where the fault lies.
Yeah, absolutely. So then, hey, let's dive into ITT and Hoxhunt. I remember you guys, you had a great program before Hoxhunt. You had the typical manual phishing tool. You had your human operators using the tool. just to give people the backdrop of where you were, could you describe how did you run that old program? How many attacks a year? What were your main KPIs? Those type of things.
Yeah, so we've had a number of vendors over the years, and I think you know, it's the approach. Most of the other solutions that we had were sort of it was on schedule. Every month you would get something. People had a mindset to that, so they were prepared for it, and it gets kind of rote after a while, and people have a tendency, like I said before, to get complacent and ignore some things because of that. So it's the primary reason I think that we moved is the different approach that Hoxhunt offers to phishing awareness, right? You don't want it to get stale or repetitive or predictable, because I think Hoxhunt really broke that model. That for me is why we made it. Ultimately, the goal is to get the click rate down, right? And there are a number of ways you can do that. And I always, for better or worse, fall back to the carrot and stick analogy here, right? You want to make this as positive an interaction with the employee as you possibly can. But if an employee fails a test, the fact that Hoxhunt offers that immediate feedback and micro trainings, I think, is a relatively painless stick, right? I mean, I've seen and heard of other companies that do far more drastic things if you fail tests, and it's I think ultimately that's not going to instill a lot of cooperation and positivity in the employee base. And for me also, the gamification aspect of this within our company, at least with executive management, I've had some really high marks and good feedback from them on the gamification, which I would never have predicted before. So it's like anything else, right? We've had some good feedback, and honestly, we've had some really nasty feedback, which I guess shouldn't be surprising with 11,000 employees. You can't please everybody all of the time, but I guess that's an indication that we're doing this the right way, right? You mentioned metrics too, and as far as that goes, we've got a lot of metrics. I don't report most of them up the food chain, but we've had a substantial range of metrics that we typically look at, right? Basically, the most basic thing that we look at is simply the awareness and the number of people that negatively react to a phishing email. So did they potentially cause harm to the company because they did click on that? So we sort of try to measure that. But there's a lot of them that we do, like I said, that we don't report, like completed simulations, simulation variance, success rates, miss and fail rates, and also things that really were reported that weren't part of the phishing exercise, whether that was actually phishing or whether that's spam or something else. And because we're global, I also like to report like by country onboarding rates, success rates by country, because that sort of fosters a competitive feeling throughout the company. So
yeah, absolutely. That sounds good. You mentioned the kind of the main KPIs, click rate. That's one of your main things. That is indeed the main thing, main KPI you report up, or anything else you report up? Because I'm sure there's many in the audience right now thinking about what should they report to the board or upwards from them.
Yeah, well, the phishing is no different than anything else, or cyber threats and attacks are no different than anything else. You don't report statistics to the board, right? You report trends and things like that. However, if you want to measure the efficacy of a program, you need some other metrics, and I think click rate is a good one. We're between 4 and 5%, which I think is really pretty good. I've seen click rates. When we started this, we were probably at in the 30% range, or above that. So that's good. Attacks per employee per month is also a good metrics. We're about 15 per month per employee if you look at the sheer volume. But again, it depends on what your audience is, right? If it's a technical audience and they care about the tool itself, you report more technical, mechanisms of the tool or solution. If you're reporting up to a higher level, you want to keep it more generic and in general.
Yeah, absolutely. You mentioned the the cultural impact of Hoxhunt, of you getting some good feedback, you've been getting some bad feedback. On our surveys, we typically see that the 36 attacks a year, that's around 60% of people like that pace. So one attack every 10 days, they like that pace. 30% of people want actually more than one attack every 10 days. But then we always have that 10% of the feedback that, hey, I would like to get less of these training simulations. How was Hoxhunt kind of received when you changed from the traditional vendor, one attack a month at the same time, to Hoxhunt that's a lot more unpredictable and kind of stresses the employee in a different way? Overall, the cultural acceptance, you mentioned that the Igt leadership took it well, but then the employees, how did they react?
Yeah, I think initially, just like with any program, you're going to get some bad feedback. People view it sometimes as you're being too intrusive, and they've got their day job to do. Why are you bothering me with this kind of stuff? So we did get that feedback. I'm sort of, numb to that. I really don't take that to heart, because it's, people like doing things a certain way. If they're used to doing that, change is never easy for some people. But since we've had this in place, I got to be honest with you, I haven't heard many complaints at all. The only complaints I've heard recently are, trainings that really go after relevant subjects like the pandemic or testing or vaccinations, and I've had some pretty nasty feedback on some of those. But hey, that's real life, and I don't get worked up over it, because I don't think hackers and attackers are really caring about your personal feelings about the relevance of a topic. I would rather have things that are timely and relevant than things that aren't, because I think it hits home better.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, we monitor those threats globally, and why they're there, why they exist, is because of our global threat intelligence team has picked
Yeah,
them up.
exactly.
So
Yeah.
that's kind of where the kind of attacks come from. We de-weaponize them and then train our users with them. You can also actually set up our rules of engagement in a different way, where you would then have all of those timely attacks terminated from the program, so you wouldn't have those. So there are options for control for sure as well within the Hoxhunt program. Now, kind of on general, do you think we've been able to kind of nudge your culture towards more the positive side with Hoxhunt, or with any of your other awareness programs? Have you has that changed?
Yeah, look, I've got nothing but positive things to say about Hoxhunt right now. We've had you in place for a while, almost a year, I believe. Um, to me, it's working well, and I don't get that feeling that it's rote and standard, and people are just going through the motions. I really think we hit a chord with people, and I think the fact that they can track the gaming aspect of it and see their numbers in relation to other people, that's also been a good motivator. It's strange sometimes. You think, what would motivate people to do things, and it I guess in today's world, gamification is the way to go, but it's worked out well. I'm very happy with it.
Great, awesome. Um, okay, so we're 5 minutes to the end of the webinar, so let's pick up some questions from the Q&A. Let's see. So there's one anonymous question. Kevin, you've been in cybersecurity for a long time. What have been the biggest changes, and what changes do you see coming ahead? So what's been in the history, and what are you seeing coming ahead?
I have a lot of track behind me. So when I first started, the first PCs were coming out. So that should tell you what kind of breadth I've seen of change in this business. But I think there's a couple of things that really stick out to me, right? The way people operate, the way companies are doing business now, that was starting. The cloud journey and the remote workforce was starting before the pandemic, but that's really been accelerated. To me, that's the largest change. But also, I've had I guess the benefit of that track record of seeing the way, I guess a couple of generations have reacted to the way they work, the way they operate, and what motivates them. So that's challenged us from a security perspective. Nothing stays the same, and you can't keep the same approach year after year. You have to constantly evaluate the way people operate, the way people like to do business, the way people like to communicate, and factor all of those things in. So those changes over the years have been really, it's been a huge shift from when I started.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a couple of questions on kind of communication on Hoxhunt itself, but then on global, kind of on a more general level about phishing overall and about the importance of awareness. There's one question here. By awareness, we always talk about phishing. What else should be considered, especially if you have really technical target group? So we always talk about phishing, but what else?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously you need basic security training. That you can't get away from that. We have mandatory training that every employee has to take every year. Phishing to me is the front end of where most attack vectors. I mean, in most companies, it accounts for over 90% of the attack vectors. So you can't ignore that as a huge responsibility. But once a phishing attack maybe is successful, then you have to worry about all of that other stuff behind the scenes. So you also have to train on basic cyber hygiene and things like that, because that ultimately, if they get past the perimeter, and whether that's through phishing or some other way, you still need basic security awareness, basic security hygiene, and you need to educate people about that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Then a question from Daniel, actually a couple of them as well. On phishing, this is actually really interesting. Have you seen any kind of um, labor affairs issues when using phishing globally? So you have users in many different countries. Is there any country that does not allow phishing for its employees? Do you need to kind of take a different approach to different countries?
I have not seen it yet. If there is a problem with it, I imagine I would have heard about it by now, but I haven't heard anything. Obviously, from a privacy perspective, that's a whole different equation, right? Because especially in Europe, you got to deal with GDPR, and in the U.S., there are privacy laws like California, Massachusetts that are, becoming more GDPR-like. So privacy is a concern, but if you can keep this, you know, we're not delving into people's privacy by doing this. So I haven't seen any problem on that end either.
Okay, great. And then one last final question with a short answer before we wrap up. Have you created your own awareness program of, like, do you have any framework for it, or have you built your own framework for awareness? Can you point out our audience to a direction on, hey, this is how to build an awareness program?
Yeah, well, it's got to be aligned with the business. So you've got to see what the needs are of the individual business, and if you sort of structure a program, there's no real framework around awareness, right? It's a lot of people get together and talk about this all of the time. There's really no roadmap to doing it. You have to look at what the business requirements are. You have to tailor a program and an approach that really addresses what the business needs are.
Great, awesome. Hey, we are almost on top of the hour. Kevin, I want to thank you so much for participating today to this webinar. It's been a pleasure to have the discussion. I hope everyone else enjoyed this talk as much as I did. Hopefully everyone learned something from today. Thank you for the audience as well. Thank you for your questions. They've been really great. And I hope to see everyone in our next webinar again. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, thank you.
Hey, stay safe and healthy. Thanks. Bye.